Yelling with everyone, we're going to go ahead and start the webinar. Thank you all so much for joining us for Module 6 of the Apollo 12 series titled Strategies for Supplemental Essays and Recommendation Letters. Give us one moment as we're getting the slides pulled up. Great. So yeah, thank you again for joining us for Strategies for Your Supplemental Essays and Recommendation Letters. This is Module 6 of the Apollo 12 series for rising high school 12th graders and current high school 12th graders on developing their college application narratives and applications generally. So this module will focus on strategies to develop impactful supplemental essays and tips for approaching your recommendation letters. So we'll start out with a quick introduction before diving into a few polls. My name is Rahina Malik. I'm a recent graduate from Duke University, where I studied neuroscience and psychology, and I'm currently based in Atlanta. And I'm going to hand it off to Rahim, who is our speaker for today.
Thank you, Rahina. Yalling with everyone. My name is Rahim Punja. I am based in Chicago, Illinois. Professionally, I lead strategy for North America at Tate Lyle, which is a food science company here in the States. And I'm hoping to leverage some of my experience from being on the admissions committee at the University of Pennsylvania many moons ago, but using some of that thinking and some of the most recent research to be able to guide you all who are going through this process today. So we'll start with the, sure.
Yeah, you can go ahead. We're going to start with 3 polls, and we'll go ahead and launch those. They're just to sort of assess who our audience is, and Rahim, if you want to share any more about those.
Yeah, so it'll be 3 questions just to get a sense of where you are, and we ask that you answer these honestly, just so that we can gauge the kind of the mix of folks who are on the webinar. This will be anonymous, so don't feel like any of your information will be revealed or that we'll kind of call you out for any purposes. Raina, do you want to sort of mention what each question is?
Yeah, so there'll be 3 questions on how many people are joining the webinar, including yourself, whether you're working on your supplemental essays, if you have a draft completed of them, and it's totally fine if you don't. And the third question will be on recommendation letters, and you should see the polls on the screen, and you'll be able to answer them as they pop up. So we'll go ahead and launch those.
We'll give you all just another moment.
Okay, great. So we'll move on to the second poll. So the question for this poll is, Do you have a draft of your supplemental essays? And it's totally fine if you do not. Okay, great. And we'll move on to the final question. So our last poll question is, do you know who you would like to ask for recommendation letters? And have you already asked those persons or that person? And it is totally fine if you don't know at this point. And if you'd like any clarification on the answer choices, please drop that in the chat or Q&A.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate the honesty and the transparency. These results will help us just shape the conversation here a little bit and tweak it so that it's appropriate for all of you and given where you are in this process. So we'd like to start with a quote from Maulana Hazar Imam, and this is from a speech that Hazar Imam delivered during the Peterson lecture. If you've got a screen in front of you, you can follow along. Quote, "You can have nothing in your pocket and only the clothes and the shoes you wear, but if you have a well-educated mind, you will be able to seize the opportunities life offers you and start all over again." Now you'll notice, end quote, sorry. You'll notice that this speech was delivered in 2008, so over a decade ago, right around the Golden Jubilee celebrations here in the United States. And it seems that this quote is quite apropos, very relevant for the current situation that we all find ourselves in. So let's start by talking a little bit about sort of where we are and how this sort of this module will help us here today. As Rahina mentioned, we'll be covering the supplement essays that are typically required for schools that are more selective or highly selective. In cases where a school has its own application, not on the Common App or the Coalition app, they may have some additional short answers and supplement essays that they will require as well. This hopefully is at the point in the journey where you now have a full list of colleges and universities that you're considering. You've started to do the research on those schools to understand what those schools have to offer you. You've also put together the criteria for what's important to you and how important it is. Hopefully, based on our conversation from Module 5, you've also been able to spend some time mapping out your profile, some of the activities that you've been involved in, and some of the kind of takeaways or sort of growth opportunities that you've had through those experiences. And so now we'll kind of turn to some of the remaining components of the application. What we'll be targeting those individuals who are 12th graders already, if your school has already started, or rising 12th graders because you're just a couple of weeks away from senior year. If you are on the webinar and you're outside of those two groups, you're more than welcome to stay on and listen, but just realize that we'll be speaking about the specifics and sort of the tactics of the application and the application process. If you've already written a supplement or a draft of a supplement, it seems like very few of you have, just based on the poll. But if you are in that situation, hopefully you'll be able to glean something from this conversation and still reflect that back in the drafts that you are writing or that you have to write still. And again, if you've got any questions, feel free to drop those into the chat box, and we'll try to either address those during the conversation here or allocate some time at the end to cover those questions. So at a high level, we'll do a quick review of Module 5, which was the topic on the extended essay for the Common App or the Coalition app. We'll dive into the supplements, the recommendation letter strategies. We'll talk a little bit about sort of the impact of COVID-19 on these two particular components of your application, and then just some general best practices that we'll talk about at the end. All right, so let's go ahead and run a quick review of what we covered last time, because a lot of what we talked about is still relevant for your supplements, but also just to kind of refresh and remind you of how you may want to think about writing your essay overall. So we mentioned that the admissions committee members have stacks and stacks of applications that they will be reading through the fall and the winter seasons, and it can be quite cumbersome and quite mundane, especially when you have students talking about the ramifications of COVID-19 or just some of their experiences in what is more simplified methods. And so your goal and your hope as an applicant is to really sort of bring your application to life, and you're hopefully doing that through the essays that you have available to you. We often use the analogy of the 30-second Super Bowl commercial as well, and you might, many years later, you may not recall certain plays or certain calls that were made by the referee, but you may remember commercials that were sort of memorable and left an impression on you. And so you want to sort of think about your essays and kind of your application in a very similar creative fashion, because you've got a short window to impress the admissions committee member. So if you think about the qualitative aspects or the qualitative components of your application, we have previously covered the activity list and the extracurriculars in Module 3. Module 5, we talked about the extended essays that are typically used for the Common App, but you'll also find those in school-specific applications if the school is not on a Common App. Today, we'll be covering the other three buckets, or the other three areas. Your supplement essays, which are typically a few hundred words, short answers, which are part of the supplemental section, and then recommendation letters. And then hopefully then you'll have a collective strategy for how you articulate your experiences and perspectives and dimensions of who you are as an applicant and as a candidate. So as a reminder, the admissions committee, when they're reviewing the applications, there's a number of things that are running through their minds, and oftentimes they boil down to a few specific questions. Now, every school's admissions committee is different, so this is not to suggest that these are the sort of standard questions that everyone asks, but broadly speaking, these are the areas that they're looking to make sure that they can answer as they're reading your application. The first is, can we satisfy this applicant's interests, passions, and pursuits? And hopefully they'll get a sense of that because they'll start to appreciate some of the things that you've been involved in, or some of the things that you would like to get involved in during your college experience. The second component, or the question that they typically reflect on, is will this applicant enhance the community at our school? And this is typically pertaining to things like your ability to articulate classes you may be interested in taking, or extracurriculars that you would want to get involved in once you were to arrive on campus. The third question that admissions committees are typically reflecting on is, does this individual bring a unique voice or perspective? And this is important because you can imagine the number of football team captains or student council presidents or community service contributors that are applying to various schools. And so this question is important because it allows you to not only just talk about your experience, but really sort of differentiate that experience and sort of articulate what that experience meant to you and sort of how it's affected you. And that hopefully then sets you apart from the others who may have a similar profile or a similar set of experiences. And then all of this really sort of comes down to what I want to have this person, this applicant, as a roommate, right? And that's really getting to the heart of understanding whether the individual or the applicant is someone who will provide intellectual stimulation, will have a sense of integrity, and will be able to build trust, and a lot of other things that you may consider looking for in a roommate. So we talked about two approaches last time. The first one was mapping out who you are, really by thinking about the dimensions or sort of the aspects of your background or character. And hopefully those things are supported by some of the extracurriculars, some of the hobbies and other activities that you may be involved with, both inside the classroom as well as outside. A second approach that was recommended was the approach of what we call the three key questions. And so this was for each activity, whether it be kind of a school project or an extracurricular or a hobby, to think about the impact that you had through that experience, maybe what you learned or sort of how your views were shaped or evolved through that journey, and then how you were influenced as a result. In other words, if you had not had that experience, how would you be a completely different person? So you can take either one of these approaches, and you can also take both and still ensure that you're comprehensively addressing different parts of who you are. So just as a reminder, if you haven't gotten to this point yet, hopefully you can spend some time to reflect on these. If you have started to play with these, hopefully you've realized the value in mapping out your background and really sort of thinking about your experiences in this way. And then the last piece that we'll use just here as a review is this sort of sense of this framework of a table where you can use to ensure that you're not repeating yourself in your application. And what does that mean, right? So if you've got your extended essay, which typically will go into your Common App or your Coalition app, um, it will cover one particular topic or one particular experience. Your supplements and short answers, indicated with the blue X's here, will likely cover a few different aspects of who you are or a few different parts of your background. And then your recommendation letter, which is indicated here in the green, will maybe be about a particular activity or a contribution you made. And so the speaker or kind of the recommender will talk to your traits and your characteristics from that lens. And so you'll see that for University 1, which may not have a supplement, you're able to kind of talk about some of the things that are of greatest interest to you or kind of you feel are sort of the greatest aspects of who you are. University 7, where you do have supplements, you're able to provide a more holistic and even a more complete view of your background and of your candidacy. And so we'll send this framework out to all of you so you have it, but it's a very simple Excel spreadsheet just for you to keep track, so that you're not repeating yourself or that your recommender is not saying something that you may have already said in another part of your application. All right, so let's turn now to the supplement essays. And really, when we think about the supplements, we think about your short answers as well as some of your longer answers that may be in the form of an essay in a few hundred words or so. There are really sort of two broad buckets that we can think of when it comes to your supplemental essays and short answers. There's the first bucket, which we're calling prodding and probing. And this is really around getting to know you better as an applicant. So you'll see questions like, what were some of your favorite books that you read during high school, either for class or for leisure? It'll ask you questions about describe the neighborhood in which you grew up. Tell us about a song or a form of activity or engagement that you've really enjoyed in the past recent years. It may ask you about your favorite words. It may ask you about your favorite author. So just questions that are really designed to get to know you a little bit better. The second bucket of supplemental questions are what we call engaging and validating. And these are the admissions committee's attempt to understand how you think you're going to fit into their community. So what are the things you're going to take away from that school, and what are the things you will bring to that community or that school for the betterment of other students and sort of the general sort of attendees there. And so these will be questions like, what would you major in, or what are you interested in studying? Why are you interested in this school? What are the things that you'll do once you arrive here? What makes you different? How will you contribute to our community, et cetera? So these are questions around ensuring that there's a match between what the school has to offer as well as what you might be able to bring to that environment. So we'll talk primarily about the questions in the second bucket, because things that are in the first bucket are parts of who you already are, and so there's not much that we can do to change those. But the way you may answer the prompts in the second bucket will become very critical in order to ensure you're providing a compelling and persuasive narrative.
And Raheem,
So, sure.
do you mind if we go ahead and just define specifically what a supplemental question is, as opposed to what a regular Common App question is, or like the regular Common App prompts that are
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Um, so in the Common App, and again, it'll vary depending on whether your school that you're applying to is part of Common App or Coalition App or both, or they may even have their own application entirely. But the extended essay or the essays that you typically see in the Common App are things to really allow you to kind of go deep in a particular area. So for the Common App, as an example, you have 650 words that you can use to kind of reflect on and sort of talk about a particular part of who you are or sort of part of your background. So some of the prompts that we discussed last time were things like, talk about a challenge or an obstacle that you overcame, talk about a time when you were able to make a change or sort of, shift the thinking amongst a group or a team. So sort of really allowing you to kind of go deep in one particular experience and sort of use the space for that essay to share your thoughts and your reflections. The supplements are really designed to kind of round out that perspective then. And so it may allow you time to or space to go into certain parts of who you are, parts of your background, why it is that you're interested in a very particular school, because not all schools have supplements. So the schools that are really a bit more selective and who are a bit more intentional about who they're inviting into their community and onto their campus are the ones that may want to sort of probe a little more to be able to understand your background and your profile. Rahina, anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you so much. I guess I also just wanted to clarify. We've been getting some questions about, do all schools require supplemental essays? And no, they don't. It just depends on the school. Like maybe some schools just require you to do your Common App essay, the main one that you submit to various schools. And then other schools will ask you to do those supplemental questions on some of these questions that are on the current slide right now.
Yeah, and we've got the recording for module 5. So if anyone is wasn't able to participate in that and would like to understand more about kind of the overarching strategy with regards to essays, we can definitely guide them there. So if we think about this second bucket of supplemental essay prompts and really sort of thinking about how we may go about ensuring that we've got the right talking points and the right perspectives, we sort of are reminded of some of the things that we discussed in a few of the earlier modules, right? And this is really all about researching the schools that are on your list, making sure you really sort of understand what makes that school stand out for you, what makes it appealing for you, and so a number of different resources that you can use to gather that information. Of course, you can start with the school's website, but realize that the school's website is a marketing tool. It's designed to show you very happy students that are all smiling while they're doing community service, right? Just as an example. But these are tools that the schools are using to be able to drive their brand and sort of drive their advertising. And so really kind of take that with a grain of salt. But there's a lot of factual information on the school's website, such as the types of classes that they offer, the types of majors, the professors, et cetera, that you'll only be able to get from that particular location. We've also recommended in the past looking at a school's newspaper because oftentimes universities will have a weekly, if not a weekly, a daily newspaper, and it gives you an opportunity to get a sense of what the pulse is on the campus. What are the students talking about? What are the things that are driving debate on campus or consternation on campus that you can just sort of get the sense of so that you may be able to talk about that as part of your essay, right? But a number of other resources, reaching out to counselors at your high school, reaching out to friends and family who may have attended some of these universities that are on your list. We call out Common Data Set for those who haven't used it. It's an aggregator that basically makes available to you all of the average GPAs, the average ACT, SAT score, any sort of quantitative data that you may want to know on a particular school. Common Data Set has that on their site. And so you can go to one place and pull all of that data. So then you're able to tell which school might be a reach, match, or safety based on your own profile. So this is how you'll gather some of that information or some of those insights on a particular school. But why is that important? It's important because you want to be able to identify and really understand a school's mission or vision. What is it that they're setting out to do? What is their sort of mantra? What are the things that are important to the university and the things that they promote from a community standpoint? You also want to understand what is it that you can bring? Where is there a gap in the school or in the school's profile even that you can maybe fill based on your experiences or your background? But then what are the things that you want to take away from that academic experience, right? What are the classes that you may be interested in or the types of majors that they may offer you? And fundamentally, how will they help you achieve your overall goals? And if we think about a college education as an investment, you really want to spend the time researching each of the schools on your list so that you can ensure that you understand what the return on that investment will be. And hopefully some of these whys will come through in your supplement essays as well. So let's talk about what makes a supplemental essay strong. Um, and we'll take a typical question that shows up in a supplemental prompt. So the one that we have here is, why do you want to attend University A? And this could be any university that's on your list. So if I'm applying to University A, I might say that I would like to attend your school because of the diversity that you have on campus, because of the econ major that you offer, and also because of certain clubs that you make available to students that I'm really interested in participating. Now, these could be my reasons for why I'm really excited about University A. It may be my first choice or my second choice or my 15th choice, but I need to still make the case as to why I am interested in this school, because this school does not know that they are my first or my 15th choice. The question that you have to ask yourself, if you've made a list like this of reasons, you have to ask yourself, can anybody else call out the same reasons that I have just laid out here? So can anybody else appreciate the school's level of diversity? Can they sort of show interest in an economics major, or can they sort of express their desire to participate in certain extracurriculars? If they are able to do that, if somebody else comes along and is able to say the same things in their supplemental essay as you have, that means that you have not differentiated yourself far enough. And so you've got to go a step further or a level deeper to be able to justify why those things are of interest to you. And this might seem quite simple, but I have and all of us have actually read essays where students from our community, from our Jamaat, talk about a school's diversity, but don't justify it or don't back it up. So it's very important that you ask yourself, can anybody else put these same sentences in their supplemental essay? And if so, then I have not done a good enough job to be able to provide more detail or to sort of really differentiate. So what might help this stand out? So an example of why diversity is important to me could be because I've attended a high school that is quite homogeneous. It's homogeneous in the sense of culture and race, socioeconomic status, sort of academic pursuits and interests, athletics, whatever it might be. But those things really sort of stymied my academic growth and really sort of limited my ability to appreciate certain aspects of the world or of society that I was not able to be exposed to as a result of my high school experience. And so looking to University A and seeing that they offer a fellowship on sort of the studies of diverse cultures and traditions. They have a monthly sort of celebration of different backgrounds and sort of interests, et cetera. And those are the reasons why I would like to come to University A, because it sets up an environment where my interests and my curiosities of the world will not be hindered, because unlike my high school experience, this university is doing something very specific to really sort of stand out for me. Can another applicant now talk about this, the importance of diversity in the same way as I just did? The chances or the likelihood is low, right? So I've leaned on my high school experience. I've talked about why diversity is important, not just that the school offers it, but I've really sort of been able to tell the admissions committee why this is important to me, and not just why it's important to me, but what your school is going to do or is doing to be able to satisfy my needs and my requirements. And so this passes the student to student check, because another student telling the exact same story as me is likely not going to happen. So let's look at it from another angle. Now, I want to tell University A about the diversity that they have on campus, the economics major, and some clubs and activities that they offer. Can I take the same essay, copy and paste it for a supplemental essay of another university that I'm applying to? If the answer is yes, that means, again, that I have not differentiated my response far enough for University A. So will University A think that my supplemental essay is effectively a copy and paste? And if they think that, then my chances of being accepted are probably limited. And so what I want to do is I want to go a step further, and I want to talk about why University A's diversity stands out to me, why the econ major is so much different than it might be at other schools or at other institutions. And so how might we do that? We'll do that again by leaning into our background or tapping into some of our experiences to be able to justify why this is important. Because at the end of the day, the university already knows that they have a diverse campus, or they know that they do, they offer certain majors. And so for us to tell that back to them doesn't really provide a reasonable point of view. And so it's critical that we sort of take it a step further. And so as an example, what I might say is that my family had to migrate during the Civil War in the Indian subcontinent of the 70s, and we had to relocate ourselves to North America, where we basically had to start from scratch economically. And my hypothesis is that had we stayed in our home country, our financial status or financial situation would be far different than what it is today, because we are sort of struggling economically today. And by the way, University A, I know that you have a professor who has done an extraordinary amount of research on the recovery models of Latin America, the economic recovery of Latin America, when they had some sort of economic hardships or some political strife. And I'm really interested in studying with this professor to be able to satisfy this kind of long-standing hypothesis that I've had about the bad decision that my family made to migrate. Again, this is just an example, but it shows you the extent to which I have to go to make the case that I've done my research on this university. I completely appreciate and understand everything that this school has to offer me. And by the way, I also have a plan so that when I arrive on campus, from day one, it's very likely that I know exactly what I'm going to do, where I see the kind of academic opportunities, and where I would like to spend the bulk of my free time. And so University A will realize that this is not a copy and paste essay, but I've spent the time to do the research and to get to know the school and to be able to then sort of articulate that back to them so that they know exactly where my interests lie and why I'm interested in them. And that will allow them to even think that this is a first choice school for me, whether it is or not, right? Similarly, I will not be able to take this exact same essay and use it for another school. And so being able to do the research on why a particular school is important or of interest to you is critical so that you can make these arguments within your supplemental essays. So to summarize that, I know we kind of shared a number of different things here, but just to summarize that, if you think about your supplemental essay and after you've written a draft or when you have an outline, think about what the case is that you're making, why a certain school is of interest to you. And if you feel that another applicant can say the exact same thing, then you need to take it a step further and you need to think about how you might differentiate it. What's the rationale that you want to build into your supplemental essays? Similarly, if there's a supplemental outline or a draft of an essay that you've written for a particular school, take that school's name out and reflect on whether you can use that exact same supplemental essay for another school. And if you can, that means you have an opportunity to do some more research on the first university to really get a sense for what it is offering you and why those things are not available at some other institution that you might be considering. So if we go back to our framework of the 4 key questions, when the admissions committee is thinking, can we satisfy this applicant's interests, passions, and pursuits? The copy and paste question will come up, right? Is this an essay that they're likely using in another application? And if the answer is yes, then again, it probably won't bode very well for you. But the school-to-school check that you'll run will hopefully allow you and allow the admissions committee member who's reading your application to answer, yes, we can satisfy the student's interests and passions. For the second question, will this applicant enhance the community at our school? Again, this is all about, what is it that you want to take from the school? What are the academic and extracurricular offerings that you want to take advantage of? But then also, what is it that you're going to bring back? How will you enrich the classroom discussions, or what will you contribute to student life and to sort of the campus community? And if you think about it in that way, then hopefully the admissions committee member who's reading your application will be able to answer yes to this question as well. The third question around, does this individual bring a unique voice or perspective? So again, this is critical, especially for the schools that are a bit more selective, because what they're doing is they're not looking to just fill one seat, but they're looking to build a very diverse class. And the way they can do that is that they're able to see how you've differentiated yourself from somebody else who may have a similar experience or a set of similar experiences compared to you or compared to even other students. So these 3 or 4 questions become quite critical and hopefully become your guide or sort of your roadmap, because you want to ensure not only that you're answering these questions, but the tools that you have to be able to answer these questions are quite simple and ones that we've shared here today. Rahina, anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, thank you, Raheem. So I'll add a couple of things. I think that if you're looking at the slide and you're struggling in thinking about these certain aspects of the school that you want to talk about, like what will be your imprint, what are the things that you're looking forward to, what are the classes and extracurriculars and events and opportunities that you're looking for, I would encourage you to revisit the presentation that Raheem did on May 28th, Module 3 on developing your college shortlist. And that'll provide a lot of insight into, doing your research behind why you want to apply and attend a school in the first place. So whether that's, taking virtual tours online of schools, doing, extensive research into, the study abroad programs or funded internship programs, just the general camaraderie of the school, sports events, things that bring the school together. Just doing as much research as you can and talking to people who have attended or currently are students at that school, including Smiley students, can really give you some more perspective and allow you to continue this reflection process of why you want to attend those schools, and those will be able to shine in your supplementals then. Yeah, and I would also encourage you to think about, in addition to your personal essay, if there are specific topics or stories that you want to share that you think could fit into a supplemental essay. Like if you're thinking, gosh, I really wish I could talk about this one experience that I had and relate it to, this question that this supplemental essay question that this college is asking for me, go ahead and go for it, because that'll be another perspective for the admissions committee to see about yourself in addition to your main common app essay. So I would just add those 2 things.
Great, thank you, Rahina. So you might think that it's all simple and black and white, and sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. So this is an example of another supplemental essay prompt that's out there. If you got if you're following along on the screen here, then you'll see it there. But for those of you who are dialed in, I'll just read it out. It goes, X marks the spot. What's X? And oftentimes prompts like this will be very perplexing to students. Obviously, students will spend days, weeks, sometimes too many weeks to think about how they should answer this. They might think that it's a trick question, and in situations like this, or in other situations where the prompt itself is quite confusing and seems like a pitfall, all you've got to do is stay calm. We've seen this quite a bit. We've seen other prompts like "Where's Waldo?" and you think, why is this an essay prompt? This is not something I can address or I can talk about. But you've got to step back. You've got to really sort of realize that you're not writing for an English class or a history class, but you're writing because you're trying to tell your story. and you're trying to make a point as to why you should be accepted into that school. So if you go back to what we've shared in Module 6, it was ignore the prompts, right? We talked about sort of whether it's your Common App or Coalition app or anything else, ignore the prompts, figure out what it is that you want to cover and what it is that you want to talk about, and then sort of have that be the basis or the premise for your prompt. So in this case, we might go back to our framework to look and see what extracurriculars maybe we did not cover, or what parts of our background or profile we haven't talked about, or even, if we haven't been able to make the case for why school A or school X is interesting or important to us, maybe that becomes the X, right? So in this case, we can sort of say, or we might say that X is actually Professor Smith, who's done the research on the economic recovery models in Latin America. And I've been wanting to pursue kind of scholarly work in this space because this is the situation that my family endured, and these are the things that I believe to be true. So it's not that you've got to think about X in a very creative way. You can, if you've got that creativity and that ability to position it in such a way, but you can also just think about it very simply. What is it that I haven't already talked about? And what is it that I still need to say in order to justify some of the things that are important to me, or that really allow me to choose this school over others? So if we can think about some of the best practices here around just essays and essay writing in general, make sure the focus stays on you. Oftentimes, some of these prompts will ask the applicant to talk about a person who has inspired you, or talk about an experience that you've had and why that was important to you. And for those of us in the community who serve through Jamaati activities, we might feel like we have to explain, if we want to talk about Aga Khan Foundation, we have to explain first who Haziram is. Or if we want to talk about Camp Mosaic, we have to first explain what the Ismaili community is. And we've seen situations, or we've seen essays where 40 to 50% of the essay is really just explaining something before the student even starts to talk about who they are or why this relates to them. So make sure that the focus is on you, because Haziram is not applying to the college. The person who inspired you is not applying to the college. Camp Mosaic is not applying to the college. It's you who are applying, or who is applying. And so you want to think about just setting the scenario or the context up very quickly, and then moving to sort of why that is important to you, or kind of the effects that experience had on you. So make sure that you keep the focus on you. And how do you do that? You kind of go back to those three key questions, right? What was the impact that you had? What did you learn or take away? And then how has that particular experience shaped who you are as a person? So that would be kind of the first tip. The second tip is to just work and rework drafts. There's unlikely to be a case where you're submitting your first or your second essay draft. You should be very comfortable getting to version 10, version 15, version 25. That's perfectly okay. You may end up even higher than that, right? But the idea is that the more edits that you can make to your essay, the more feedback you can gather from others, the stronger your narrative starts to become, and the more compelling, hopefully, your case is, and your stories are in your essays. So really think about kind of doing that, and sort of going through the essay over and over and over again. And if you feel like you've gone through it too many times, step away for a day or two and come back to it with a fresh set of eyes, and think about what it is that you could change. Oftentimes we advise students just to read their essay out loud to themselves. If you read your essay out loud, you'll be able to catch a couple of grammatical or syntax issues that you don't want somebody else who's providing you feedback to spend time on. Any feedback that you get from other people, you want it to be really kind of conceptual or kind of structural, that is allowing you to kind of then strengthen your points of view, or your talking your essay talking points. All right, so let's switch gears now and talk a little bit about the recommendation letter and how that will play a role in your application. So generally speaking, and sort of at a base level, the recommendation letter is designed to provide an objective perspective on who you are as a person. It's coming from a trusted adult, either through a school or a community organization, and it's designed to solicit perspectives or inputs from that individual on your character, your contributions to that person's organization or classroom environment. The idea is that the recommender hopefully is able to share a lot of detail, a lot of specifics or anecdotes, stories that really allow you to come to life. If it's going to be a recommendation letter that's written in a few minutes or over a coffee break, it may not serve its intended purpose. And then the third kind of idea or kind of benefit of a recommendation letter is really to kind of allow you to be compared to those in your graduating class, but then also to be compared to students that this person may have taught in prior years. And the benefit of that is as you have built a relationship with this recommender and have really sort of left an impression on him or her, they're able to speak very highly of you and the contributions that you've made to their environment. Realize though that teachers or other recommenders are writing your letters out of the kindness of their heart. This is not something that they're being paid for, and they're really sort of doing it based on whatever free time they might have, or based on other competing priorities that may be presented to them. In addition to that, teachers will be asked for recommendation letters from by many students, and so you really want to think about who you're asking, whether you've really built that relationship with them, and whether he or she is able to write a very compelling letter for you. And when you approach a teacher or another kind of sponsor of an organization or an activity, some of them will say no to you. And that's actually a good thing. You want the teacher or the recommender to be honest and say, you know what, I don't feel comfortable talking about your contributions or our interactions. And that's a good thing, because then they've already automatically told you that they will not write you a strong letter. There's others who will say yes, but they'll forget. So you'll get very close to the deadline, or you may get past the deadline and you see that there's no recommendation submitted by that individual. And you don't want to be in that situation either. And then the third bucket of recommenders are those who will say yes, and they'll actually write a very solid letter on your behalf. So what can you do to ensure that you're targeting individuals who are in that third bucket? There's really 4 steps that you can take. First is to understand what the school's requirements and expectations are. Many schools have these outlined on their websites, and it'll specify whether they want 2 or 3 or even more recommendation letters. Schools will also articulate what types of individuals should be writing your recommendation letter. So in some cases, they will allow you to submit recommendation letters from teachers. In other cases, they might even say anyone who's a sponsor of an organization that you are a part of. We know of some universities who will even specify what type of teacher is permitted to write a recommendation letter for you. So they might say, we need 1 recommendation letter from a math or science teacher and 1 recommendation letter from an English or arts teacher. And so you want to be very conscious of the requirements that the school is placing on you and the recommendation that you'll be submitting. The second step is to come up with a plan. Start to identify recommenders who you think will be able to write a very strong letter for you, because they know you, they know your background, they've had many interactions with you, and they're able to sort of talk about you and your profile in very specific terms. Ensure that the recommender is not going to talk about other parts that you may already be mentioning in your application, and if they are, just cross those out in your framework and think about other things that you may want to cover in your short answers or your other essays that you're including. And then in addition to that, really think about some extra or sort of additional recommenders, because you don't want to only reach out to 3 or 4 if those are the number of letters that you need. You may want to reach out to 8 or 9 or 10. And as you're getting closer and closer to the deadline and you're seeing that your primary recommender has not submitted, you may have to activate another recommender. The third step then is to obviously ask the recommender for a letter, and you want to make it as easy for them as possible. So what we recommend is making sure that you've got a resume that's updated, and that you also have a statement of purpose. And the statement of purpose will capture some reflections of your interactions with that individual. It may capture certain traits or characteristics that you would want that individual to talk about, whether it be your teamwork or your leadership or your critical thinking, whatever it is that you feel that that person can express or reflect on during their writing. is something that you may want to remind them of. And then lastly, once you've made the request and the recommender has agreed to write the letter for you, just stay in touch with them. Every 3 to 4 weeks, reach out to them and see if there's anything else that they need, if they are making progress or not. Just as is human nature, many of your recommenders might be procrastinating, and that's okay because they clearly have other competing priorities. But if you're able to stay in touch with them, you give them a way to keep you updated, but also if you sense that they're not going to be able to write an effective letter for you or that they don't have their act together, that you can then activate another recommender in place of that individual. And hopefully, because these people have had such positive and strong interactions with you, they want to see you succeed academically and professionally. And so hopefully this becomes sort of the start of a budding kind of mentoring relationship that you can continue to nurture and cultivate over time. Rahina, anything to add from your perspective?
No, I think I'm good for now.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about your application overall. And we use the weather map as an analogy here because the weather map of the United States, as you see here, has a few different temperature settings for different parts of the country, so that collectively you can see that the northern states are experiencing certain climate, and then the southern states have have a certain climate. But you can see across the country what the weather is like. Your application is very similar. It has a number of different data points. It has your transcripts, your essay, your supplemental or short answers. It has a recommendation letter. If you were able to take the ACT or SAT before COVID-19, it's got some of those quantified metrics as part of your application. And collectively, your application speaks to who you are and some of the experiences that you have had, and then also some of what you aim to achieve during the next chapter in your academic career. Now, imagine if some of these data points are removed, right? So you start to see fewer temperature values on the map here, but in your application, you may also see fewer data points if you were not able to take the ACT or SAT, or you may not be able to in the fall. And so you really want to think about these qualitative components of your application or the parts that you have complete control over, and really invest the time and the effort to strengthen those. Because if you're in a situation where you have fewer data points in your application, those other pieces that remain become even more critical. And it become even more critical in a strategic sense because then if you don't have a quantitative metric weighing you down, let's say you're not a good test taker, or you would have taken the test but maybe you would not have performed well, you're able to still apply to schools that may be more reach or match because you don't have those quantitative components weighing you down. So the essay, the recommendation letter give you the flexibility or the opportunity to extend further into the more competitive schools that are on your list at this time. Conversely, if you're an applicant that says, you know what, I've got my entrance exam score, I actually did well on a few AP exams, so I'm pretty good. I'll just write these essays very quickly over Thanksgiving break and I'll be done. We would caution you as well, because while you may have a more complete application, you are now going up against other students who do not have a complete application and who are now gunning for spots in the more selective schools. So your essays and your recommendation letters are even more important, right? If not at par with those other students, because you now not only have to have a complete application, but you've got to defend the quantitative parts of your application as well. So it becomes quite tricky because we don't want you to feel or believe that having more data points is going to set you up, because it just means that you need to sort of still invest in your essays and your recommendation letters. What is working against both of those groups is the fact that students who should be starting college in the fall, so basically now or in a few weeks, many of those students, about 20% of those students, are actually requesting deferrals from the college or the university. And so what they will end up doing is they will end up securing spots in the class that you're supposed to be part of. So if there were 2,000 seats previously available or 15,000 seats previously available for the incoming class, now there are fewer spots because those spots are being taken by those students who are deferring their first year and becoming part of the class of 2025. So just want you to realize that there are a few other dynamics that are at play here, and hopefully that encourages you to think very seriously about your extended essay as well as your supplements and your recommendation letters. So we've put together a short timeline here just to kind of give you some guidance, but this is by no means meant to be prescriptive, but just a way for you to pace yourself. If you've got your own kind of schedule or plan, that's perfectly fine too. For those of you who are applying early, many of you hopefully have a pretty solid draft of your extended essay at this point. If you're still continuing to work on that, that's fine, you've got some time. But we encourage you to switch or kind of focus on the supplement essays as well, especially for the schools that you're applying early to, because those are the ones that you're wanting to kind of ensure that you've done the research, right? Many students who get accepted during the early rounds are not being accepted because there's a higher likelihood of being accepted. They're being accepted because they've done the work. They've done the research to be able to articulate why that school is a good fit for them. So we want to ensure that you too are spending the time on your supplemental essays and building out those stories. And then as you turn to the regular round timeline or the regular round decisions, for those of you who may already have had a good start or handle on your early applications, starting to think about any changes you want to make to the extended essay for the remaining set of schools on your list, but then also realizing that you'll have many supplements to write because each school will have their own set of short answers or supplemental questions. And we encourage you to think about driving towards a December 1st deadline for yourselves. This is really because we hope that you can spend the last month of the calendar year to increase the number of schools that you may be applying to. If you remember, we talked last time about how if you're applying to 4 schools, think about applying to 6 or 7. If you're applying to 8, try to aim for anywhere from 10 to 15 schools. The reason why we're encouraging you to increase the number of schools that you're applying to is because this particular application cycle has a number of unknowns. There are a number of factors that are going to really sort of shift and transform the application review process. The number of deferrals that are being granted are going to be sort of a wrench in the system. And as we said, a number of applicants will not have those quantitative elements of their application. And so there's quite a few things up in the air which make it less predictable. I mean, college admissions has already been so unpredictable, and this is going to just sort of exacerbate that. So if you were, originally planning to apply to a certain number of schools, we're hoping and really encouraging you to think about December to be able to devote that month to apply to a few additional schools that maybe were on your radar, but you just didn't feel like you could, spend the time to research, or you had a pretty healthy list already. But because of the number of unknowns and the factors that are outside of our control, the wider net you can cast, hopefully the better position that you find yourself in come spring of 2021. So when it comes then to the recommendation letters, some of you may have already reached out to your teachers or other sponsors in the spring of the last year. If you haven't, that's perfectly fine. Spend the next couple of days and weeks putting together your resume and a statement of purpose, as we talked about. Have a list of recommenders that you want to contact. Have a set of backup recommenders as well. And when it comes to the end of this month or the start of the school year in September, reach out to those individuals asking for a letter, and hopefully, inshallah, if they have agreed to it, then stay in touch with them during the fall just to see how they're progressing and if there's anything that they need from you to further, to further round out their stories or their part of the application. All right, we know we have a number of parents and guardians and caregivers on the webinar here as well. And so we want you to also take away homework. It's not fair that just the students have something to do. So we first start by just sharing that, writing essays, whether they be the extended essays or the supplementals, it's a very, very stressful and often frustrating process. We've found, students who have had to restart their drafts from and begin the process all over again. We know of students who sometimes have writer's block and are unable to really capture their ideas or their thoughts on paper. And so we just encourage the parents and the guardians to give your child support and to give them the space to be able to reflect on some of the experiences that they're hoping to capture as part of their essays. In addition to that, agree as a family to a regular check-in, whether it's weekly or biweekly, but it's a good way for everyone to feel like they're on the same page, that they're all understanding what the challenges are, what the latest, kind of information is on a particular school or university, any questions or concerns, or again, frustrations that can be expressed and shared there. But if there's a regular checkpoint or check-in that you're setting up as a family, it'll be a good outlet for everyone to ask all of their questions or share their concerns in a trusted space. And then as parents and caregivers, talk with others who are in the same situation as you, or even others who may have gone through this, last year or the year before. Really sort of understand what worked well for them as a family and things that maybe you can implement within your own household. And then the last piece of advice here is that you should also be researching the schools that are on your child's list, so that when, inshallah, those acceptances are coming through in the spring of next year, you have a very intimate view and a very comfortable handle on what that school is going to offer your child. Because as a family, you're making this investment, and inshallah, you will get a return on that investment as a student, as a family, but then inshallah as a jamaat as well. So we encourage you to spend the time now to research the schools and to really appreciate what it is that those schools might be offering your student. All right, so to reiterate, for the supplemental essays, make sure that you're spending the time conducting the research so that you can understand what the specific goals or mission of each school is, so that you have an appreciation of what the school can offer you and hopefully what you can bring back to that community. Use the school to school check or the student to student check. Those are two very good ways for you to have a differentiated, personalized essay that can be very compelling for the admissions committee member to be reading. And then just read and reread drafts. Be very comfortable if there's half of your essay that you need to scrap and start all over again. Be comfortable with that. If you need to retire the entire thing and start anew, that's okay as well. Just be comfortable knowing that every idea that you bring and every edit that you make is making your essay stronger and better for your application. For your recommendation letters, ensure that you've spent the time researching the requirements that each school might have. Spend time thinking about who are the individuals who can speak very extensively about their interactions with you, and then build a request that you can then sort of use with a statement of purpose and sort of hopefully allow that process to become easier for your recommender as well. If you have a set of schools that you're already considering, think about what additional schools you might be able to add to your list. You, inshallah, will have December as time to do that, but think about in the back of your mind, how many more schools might you be comfortable with? Set up a regular check-in with your family. Once a week is a great start. But it's a way for everyone to feel like they're connected on the topic, and they can sort of share their thoughts and concerns. And then after the webinar tonight, there will be a survey that pops up on your screen. So we ask that you complete that so that we can collect your feedback and make improvements for subsequent versions of this session. Rahina, do you want to cover some of the details for Module 7?
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you, Raheem. So thank you again for joining us for Module 6. Our next Module 7 series webinar of the Apollo 12 series will be on strategies for funding your college education. And this will include information on FAFSA, scholarships, financial aid, and guidance on applications for those as well. And the dates for this two-part series will be shared in the coming weeks. And if you have not already registered for Apollo 12, please register at the tinyurl link that's displayed on the screen. It's tinyurl.com/Apollo advising. And for younger students, stay tuned for more programming. And there are a lot of benefits to signing up for Apollo advising, including having a one-on-one advisor who will help you throughout your college application process, including answering your questions on supplemental essays, personal essays, and other questions. You'll also be able to access office hours through master advisors to just drop in and ask shorter questions. And of course, you'll have access to all of the modules and their recordings via Slack. So the module recording for tonight's webinar 2, Module 6, this will also be posted on the Slack soon. So we're going to go ahead and move into the Q&A, but before I do that, just a final reminder, if you're logging off, there will be an evaluation survey that'll launch on your computers, like Raheem said, right as soon as you close the webinar. So we would really encourage you to take this survey. It's really quick, and we'd really appreciate your thoughts and feedback. Thank you. So we're going to go ahead and jump into the Q&A. We have a question on supplemental essays that we'll start with. And this question is, some of the universities I'm applying to have short answers, but not supplemental essays, and I don't understand the difference. Can you please explain the difference between the short answers and supplemental essays, including what's expected from each and their impacts? If you want to take this, Raheem, or have
Yeah,
thoughts.
certainly. Yeah, absolutely. So what we encourage you to do is think about the prompts in the short answer. Are they asking you questions just to get to know you a bit more, right? That's sort of the first bucket that we talked about. Or are they asking you questions to understand whether you're a good fit for their school or community? If it's the former, where they're asking you questions just about your background, then you know, you can answer those just as you might otherwise. But if the questions relate more around, you know, why this particular school is of interest to you, or what will you do once you're here, then you've got to be a bit more thoughtful, and you hopefully will have done some research to be able to answer those questions more thoroughly. As you're answering those questions, you can still think about the student-to-student check, right? So can another student provide the same answer to this prompt as I'm providing? If so, that means maybe you haven't given them enough detail, or you haven't sort of gone to the depth that could make this particular response stand out. Hopefully that answers the question.
Great, that's helpful. Thank you.
And then just to add to that, if it's a supplemental essay, those are usually, you know, 100 words or more, where you have a bit more space. Maybe it's even 250 words or more, where you have a bit more space to sort of express your thoughts or reflections on a particular topic. And as we mentioned, you know, there's prompts for those essays that are a bit more straightforward, such as why are you interested in this school, or what is it that you hope to study once you're here. But there might be other kinds of prompts that seem to be pitfalls, right? So the example that we shared here is X marks the spot, what's X? And in those situations, just ignore the prompt, think about what it is that you haven't already covered that you want to cover, and then use the prompt in a creative way to just connect it back to your response.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Raheem. So we have a few more questions on recommendation letters rather than supplemental essays. So we'll go ahead and start with those. One thing just to kind of clarify, we got some questions on how students should go about contacting their recommenders, like via email, or does it have to be done via the Common App? Usually you'd want to request your recommender via email, or if you feel comfortable having like a Zoom call or a video chat call to talk with them, however you've maintained your relationship in the past, at a social and physical distance, of course. to ask them. And you want to do that courtesy before you input their name and email into the Common App portal, and that will send a direct link for them to fill out the recommendation letter to my knowledge and understanding, but check the Common App guidelines on how that specifically works. So one of our questions is, how should we know what our teacher or recommender will talk about in our recommendation letters? Are we allowed to see our recommendation letters? And, oh, sorry. And how do we make sure that our recommender isn't saying what we are saying, or basically they're not being repetitive?
Yeah, it's a great question. The statement of purpose hopefully allows you to guide the recommender. So you imagine that the teachers that you might be reaching out to or coaches that you might be contacting are also being contacted by other students, right? So they're not just writing one recommendation letter. So the easier you can make it for them, the better it is for you as well as for them and their willingness to write a letter for you. If it's a teacher that you had for physics class or a teacher you had for a series of math classes, you will start by kind of talking about some of the things that you know that you want to sort of have the recommender reflect on through those particular experiences, right? So whether it was a certain kind of research project you ran for within that class, or some of the contributions you made, or additional things you may have done for other students in that particular course. So starting with kind of the specifics or kind of the experience themselves, but then guiding your recommender to touch on the kind of the soft skills or the qualitative skills, right? Were you able to demonstrate leadership? Did you kind of leverage your critical thinking and problem solving? Did you display a sense of resilience that was unparalleled to your peers? So the statement of purpose will allow you to capture some of these ideas, and they don't have to be sort of extensive paragraphs, but just even in bullet form, right? Sort of addressing the recommender and saying, I would love and feel honored if you are able to submit a recommendation for me. These are the points you might consider touching on in your letter, right? And then you have a couple of these sort of specific experiences, and then also some traits or qualities that you feel the recommender can touch on. Now, they may ignore all of that and sort of write something completely different, and that's okay. But at least you've given them something to chew on or something to begin the process, versus them sitting down with a blank piece of paper and then just having to really reflect on their interactions with you. So that would be the first piece as to how you might approach it. As Rahina mentioned, if you want to send an email or set up a Zoom call to formally ask them, but then also follow up with a resume and a statement of purpose so that they have that as reference. And you want to make sure that they're talking about the things that they've had interactions with you about. So if I'm reaching out to my geometry teacher and asking her to write a letter for me, I don't want her talking about my experience as a soccer player for the high school team, right? Because my geometry teacher doesn't have those observations or those interactions on the field. I want her to really kind of talk about the interactions with me in the classroom or things related to the subject that we were involved with, that sort of allows her to kind of reflect on the interactions and the specifics. Because if it becomes a general letter about, yes, Raheem has a lot of leadership and he demonstrated that leadership by being vice captain of the soccer team, well, she doesn't have the context or the ability to kind of reflect deeply on those experiences of mine. And so you want to try to guide them to some of the things that you feel they can talk about and talk, sort of extensively about. With regards to the question about, whether you should look at the letter beforehand or not, sometimes recommenders will give you a copy of what they're submitting. Sometimes they won't, and that's entirely up to them. I wouldn't ask them for a copy, because the idea is that if you're reaching out to the recommend or to teacher as for a recommendation letter, your hope is that they're going to speak very positively about you, and you just trust that that's going to be the case.
Yeah, definitely. It's so important to send that information, regardless of if the teacher uses it or not, and make sure that that information that you're sending, including with your statement of purpose, is aligning with what types of experiences and interactions you had with that specific teacher. Great. So since we're a bit over time, we'll just take a couple more questions. I'm going to combine two questions. So, does the year that you had a teacher or you were a student of that teacher matter? For example, if you had the teacher sophomore or your sophomore year or your first year, does that matter? And are retired teachers that you knew and trust able to write recommendation letters?
Say that second part again.
Are retired teachers that you knew and trust able to write recommendation letters?
Yeah, it's a good question. So again, look at the requirements of a particular school because they will very distinctly lay out for you what it is that they would want to see as part of your application. If the school is giving you a bit more liberty or license to decide for yourself, then it's better to reach out to teachers who you've interacted with more recently, relatively speaking, because they will have some of those interactions in their mind, or hopefully they will, and they'll be able to reflect on those. If it's someone who you've interacted with 3 or 4 or even longer years ago, then that comes into question as to sort of what the interactions were with your teachers, in your junior or sophomore year. So that would be the guidance. Is the more recent would be better, just because it'll be fresher in their minds. But if you've had sort of a multi-year relationship with a teacher, then obviously those are fine too. Teachers who are retired, obviously their retirement is outside of your control, but again, if they're able to speak to your particular experiences and some of the observations that they have of you during your time in high school, then I imagine that would be okay, assuming that the university that you're applying to doesn't kind of call that out specifically.
Yeah, thank you. So just the last couple of questions that we'll take. So one of the questions is, I'm applying to several schools and some have up to 8 to 12 short answers and supplements. What is your advice on managing several supplements while getting through the application and other components?
Yeah, that's a great question. Uh, One thing that we've seen students use is Google Docs, right? So, bringing over the prompts from a supplement application into a Google Doc and setting it up that way so that you can keep track of your answers. You may even set it up in Google Sheets, whatever you feel comfortable with. But you could even have different documents or different tabs of a Google Sheet for each of the schools that has your supplement or has supplement requirements for you. So that would be one easy way that we've seen students manage. And then at the end of that process, once you feel like you have everything in a ready state, you then just port everything over into the application file and then submit once you're ready.
Yeah, definitely echo that. Using a Excel spreadsheet helped me a lot. I was able to organize not only like checking off the different components of the application and whether they were submitted, but also my supplements. So yeah, would definitely recommend that as well. Um, Great. And so just our last couple of questions. Are you able to ask one teacher for multiple recommendations? I would assume the answer is yes. Um,
Yeah, and hopefully they're able to, reuse parts of their recommendation letter for different
mhm.
schools, because, you have to make the case for why a university or a college is of particular interest to you. They may not have to do that, right? So if they're just talking to your credibility or your background, they just need to sort of speak about you objectively and kind of, anecdotally, but they don't necessarily have to say why you're a good fit for a school unless they themselves are an alum of a particular school that you're applying to, right? Or if you have fed them certain data points to suggest that they call those out as well. But otherwise, they can just speak objectively and kind of more coherently about your background and then reuse those passages for different recommendation letters.
Yeah, definitely. So our last question that we'll take for tonight, and we apologize if we weren't able to get to all of the questions. We tried to answer some of them through chat as well. But if you have any other additional or specific situational questions, feel free to reach out to our email or via Slack. So the last question that we'll take tonight is, well, this has actually come from several people. If you do not have many extracurricular activities and not enough people or recommenders to offer a good description of your character and achievements, what should you do? And I kind of just wanted to also say, before Raheem speaks on this as well, I think that that this requires a lot of reflection, because there are definitely, or most likely, activities and people who are in your life, or that you may have built a good relationship with, whether that's in your school or your research program that you did one summer, or your internship, or many other avenues, your guidance counselor, who often does a separate recommendation letter for the Common App also. So I'd look into the Common App guidelines for that. But there are definitely several people who are hopefully rooting for you, and you hopefully have, a little bit of a relationship with. And it's not too late to continue nurturing those relationships, even if it is remotely, even if it is via video chat and physically distanced. There are still ways to continue building those relationships with your teachers throughout your high school time. And then, of course, like if you're entering 12th grade as well, there's opportunities to build relationships there. But I'd really recommend strengthening some of the relationships, or starting to establish stronger relationships with past teachers, past mentors, etc. And I think that requires a lot of reflection, but there's definitely a lot of, activities, whether it's like working a job or family responsibilities, that maybe go underlooked as non-traditional extracurricular activities that are outside of school. So I would continue to keep reflecting, and make a list of some of the other things you're involved in outside of school, and some of the people who you felt have, guided you, even if it's a little bit, and work on building and nurturing those relationships.
Yeah,
And Raheem,
and
if
then
you add.
sure. To add to that, I would say, if the school is asking a letter, asking for a letter from a teacher, then you have no choice. You have to look at the classes that you've taken your freshman, sophomore, and junior years, and think about the teachers who you feel either that you've had a good relationship or interaction with, or who can speak, kind of highly of you and your background. If the school gives you a little bit more leeway or leniency and sort of allows you to pick your own recommender, then think about sort of the Jamaati activities that you may have been involved with, or activities through your neighborhood or your communities that you can sort of consider reaching out to the organizing member or the organizing individual. We've even seen recommendation letters from like a Mukhi or a Mukhianima for students, and those are fine, even REC teachers. But whoever it is that's writing your letter, you just want to ensure that they're able to speak very, very specifically about your background, right? So if I ask a Mukhianima to write a letter for me, what's the basis of that letter? Is it going to be just that I come to Jamaat Khana and that I'm a member of a congregation? Or is it going to be that, she has observed me mentor other youth in the Jamaat? She has observed me, sort of be at the ready when it comes to needs that the Jamaat has had, or assisting seniors in the Jamaat Khana. I mean, what specific things can the individual talk to that will allow the application to kind of have a different dimension than other parts that you have control over? So whomever you ask, just think about what might this person say, and will that be kind of detailed enough or deep enough to kind of make a compelling case for me. In addition to that, if you've known someone just for a few months, that may not be as meaningful, right? If I join a sports team in September when school reopens, and I ask the kind of the team's coach to write a letter for me, how much can he or she say that will make the case as to why I'm a great student or a great team member or team captain or whatever it might be? So you want to look for individuals who you've had an extended period of interactions with, so that they can reflect on the different moments of their relationship with you, and really sort of talk to those things as to sort of as to your background.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Raheem. So, looks like that might be all the questions that we're going to take tonight. I also just wanted to clarify, I mentioned that I used an Excel spreadsheet to organize my supplements and college applications. You can easily find templates online if you just search on Google, college application organization templates, or create your own, have columns for due dates and supplemental questions, whether you've done them or not, etc. But yeah, so thank you all so much for joining us tonight for Module 6 on supplemental essays and recommendation letters. And thank you so much to Raheem for organizing this and developing and creating and presenting a really helpful and awesome presentation. And yeah, so there will be a survey that will open after the webinar ends. It'll launch directly on your computer, and we'd again appreciate your feedback and thoughts about the webinar. And if you have any additional questions, or if we didn't get to your questions, feel free to reach out via Slack or to the AKB email, and we'll try our best to help you out. You can also refer to your advisors, your Apollo 12 assigned advisors, and the Master Advisors office hours. Those are two really great resources that I'd encourage you to definitely check out and utilize if you haven't been doing it as much, especially as they'll be able to give you more tailored feedback as you continue your applications and personal and supplemental essay narratives. So thank you so much for joining, and thank you again to Raheem. Hope everyone stays safe and well, and have a great night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.